Welcome everyone to today's webcast. Better Portfolio Selection starts with Microsoft's PPM Platform. My name is Ben Chamberlain, Chief Product Officer here at UMT360. Today is going to be more of a kind of how-to session. We're going to look at how Microsoft Project Online or Project Server automates the portfolio planning and portfolio selection process. We'll start off by really taking a look at different planning techniques that we see organizations utilizing today, and then really zero in on one of those planning techniques, what we call a project-driven investment approach, and spend a majority of the day within a live demonstration of how, as I say, the Microsoft PPM Solution, Project Online, Project Server, can automate that process for you. We are going to pause at the end of the session today for a Q&A, so please use the GoToMeeting Q&A manager to pose questions, and we'll answer them at the end. So let's jump in. Here at UMT360, as a Microsoft Gold PPM partner, we spend a lot of time helping organizations to optimize and extend their investment in the Microsoft PPM platform. What surprised me over the years is how many popular misconceptions there are around the Microsoft PPM platform. Many of these misconceptions, or as we say, myths, may be due to legacy usage of the tool, usage of previous versions, or even sort of propaganda from other PPM vendors. We actually did a webcast a few months back on some of the myths that we're commonly presented with when talking to organizations either using the Microsoft PPM platform or in turn considering using the Microsoft PPM platform. It's not my intention here to go through every one of these myths that is listed here, but one of the ones that comes up again and again is the topic for today, which is the Microsoft PPM system lacks the portfolio selection and some portfolio analysis capabilities that may be needed. And that's simply not true. In fact, most of the myths, if not all the myths listed here, are not true. And they're actually strengths of the Microsoft PPM platform. Microsoft PPM platform has had world-class top-down portfolio management capabilities since the acquisition of one of our early products, UMT Portfolio Manager in 2006, which was then fully integrated into Project Server 2010, 2013, and of course Project Online, and now Project Server 2016, and forms the native part of what I'm going to show you today. So we're going to dispel myth 3 here. For those of you that have been on our webcast, this slide may look familiar. What we're seeing out there today is traditional PPM is broken or is not delivering the anticipated results that organizations expect. When I say traditional, I mean more execution-orientated PPM. No need really to go too deep into the stats listed on the right-hand side here, but there's different industry analysts or associations talking to what's not optimal within PPM today. Our own research, based on the last sort of 15 years of operating within this space, shows that these and other contributing factors, which I'm going to go into in a second, could be causing you to have a risk of around 46% of the planned business value of your investments in projects and programs. So you could have a risk around 46% of the planned business value within the investments you're making into projects and programs. So how does that translate? So this slide really talks to some of the contributing factors that could be causing that value erosion, that 46%. I'm not going to go too deep into all of these, but the first is probably the most obvious, one of inefficiency. Now, if you think about it today, PMOs, or bodies responsible for managing project portfolios, really are suffering due to many manual processes and disconnected systems, meaning they have to spend a lot of time manually reconciling information and building reports versus having information at their fingertips to make better, quicker, faster decisions. And I think the process we're going to delve into today, annual planning, is a classic example of that. Often that is a manual process and could be optimized a lot better to drive greater efficiencies. One of the big contributing factors, and the topic of today's discussion, is around unreliable planning. Again, it surprises me how many organizations don't have a structured approach for aligning execution with strategy, still funding projects on a kind of first come, first served basis. And again, I'm going to provide more details on different approaches we see organizations adopting today to align execution with strategy and build a more structured, reliable planning framework. The other area is we see the need to move from kind of the annual planning paradigm into a continuous planning paradigm. So don't settle for the kind of set it and forget it approach of annual planning. Accept the fact that variables change, other factors change, and you need to continuously plan and replan that portfolio going forward to ensure you maximize the value from that portfolio. Another area is lack of financial insights. We'll take a look at this within the context of the demo today, but if you think about it, PPM has always been weak in terms of financial management. It's prioritized kind of resource and schedule information. Financial information is often a second-class citizen. Think about the impact of financials has on value creation in a portfolio. In the upfront planning or estimating of a project, if the cost estimates are flawed, it can have a significant impact. If they're too high when you come to optimize the portfolio under different budget constraints, you're often drawing the line too early, leaving too many good projects behind. Vice versa, if the cost estimates are too low, you may be selecting too many projects, and as you run out of funds during the year, having to cut back and not gain the planned value from the portfolio. Also, budget obviously is a finite, so as cost overruns occur, which are just natural for projects, something has to give at the portfolio level, leading you to maybe de-scope, cut, cancel projects that were planned for that year, again resulting in erosion of the planned business value from that portfolio. One of the other key areas we see around that is the fact that many project managers hold money hostage. The forecasting capabilities in organizations are not where they should be, meaning that money often results, at the end of the year, that often results in a budget utilization issue where there's funds remaining, which could have been reallocated throughout that year to better drive more value from the portfolio. So financial insights are key. I'm not going to go deep into poor resource utilization. Resource management continues to be a top priority for all organizations we work with and impacts how we manage portfolios. Inadequate metrics. Now again, very few organizations are actually going beyond simple benefit estimation to actually establish benefits realization frameworks to actually figure out did they achieve the value that they set out to achieve in the first place. And disconnected portfolios is an interesting one because it simply recognizes the fact that projects and programs don't exist in a vacuum, that ultimately you fund them to make a change to something else within your organization, change a business capability, onboard a new product, enhance an IT asset like an application. So you have to sort of view the full enterprise context of your organization, understand these enterprise portfolio dependencies, and look to make decisions and generate project demand based on decisions on these other portfolios, lifecycle decisions on products, lifecycle decisions on applications, and various things like that. So these are the primary areas. Next, we're going to stop for a quick poll, but after that, delve deeper into different planning approaches that we see organizations utilizing today. So the first poll for today, which factors are holding back your PMO? This will be a multi-select, obviously the factors we just went through in the previous slide. So the factors that we have here are inefficiency, unreliable planning, lack of financial insight, poor resource utilization, inadequate metrics, and I think due to go-to-meeting limitation, we can't have 6, so we cut off the disconnected portfolios. So hopefully that wasn't the main one for you guys. So we'll let this run for another 10 seconds or so. So what are the factors holding back your PMO? The inefficiency problem, unreliable planning, lack of financial insights, poor resource utilization. This is a multi-select, so let's see where we end up with. Let's shut down the polls and see what's happening here. So as we can see here, it's kind of across all the factors, which is exactly what we're expecting, simply because, I say, from the surveys that we've run, these are obviously the primary contributing factors to that value erosion. Glad to see that unreliable planning, which is going to be the topic of today, is at 57%. We'll also talk a little bit on lack of financial insights. But as I said, it didn't go too deep into resource management and resource utilization problems, but that is still a top problem for every organization we deal with. So no surprise that's coming out at 65%. So let's move on. So we spend a lot of time over the years working with organizations to develop top-down planning techniques needed to effectively align all execution with strategy. And this is an oversimplification, but there are three types of three techniques that we see commonly being used by organizations: project-driven, program-driven, and capability-driven. Now, it's fair to say, as you move from left to right in this view here, there is a step up in maturity. I'll give the kind of executive pitch, high-level pitch in terms of how these things function and the strengths and weaknesses of each. But today we're going to focus in on the project-driven. The project-driven investment approach is probably the most common approach that we see organizations utilizing. It's one, as we'll explore today, which deals with the definition of prioritization of strategy with the key stakeholders or the executives of the organization. And then it's commonly used again in annual planning. So when you hit that kind of annual planning window within the year, you start to gather project requests from across the different businesses. But again, often these project requests are captured disconnected from the strategy. Strategy was defined and prioritized in a silo. Project requests were then entered into the system, and then using semi-sophisticated techniques, which we'll look at today, mapped against strategy and optimized under different budgets and human resource constraints to recommend the optimal portfolio. Now, this is a methodology that we actually came up with in the early 2000s, built a solution around which Microsoft then integrated into the current Microsoft PPM system. It's still a very strong way of working. Hindsight being a 2020 thing for me. When we defined this back in the day, we definitely thought it was a top-down approach to managing a portfolio. But the truth is, because strategy is defined and prioritized in a silo, and projects are often disconnected from the strategy when entered, you've got to start to ask yourself, did we start out with the right set of projects, or did we simply just select the best bunch from the demand that was captured across the organization? So how good was the initial demand intake before we figured out what we could do and when we could do it? And that's the primary frailty of this approach. It's a bottom-up approach and may not generate the highest quality of demand. Program-driven and capability-driven look to overcome that frailty. Program-driven provides that systematic way of decomposing strategy into key investment programs, multi-year investment programs. Now, these are more than just reporting veneer on top of projects. These are investment entities in their own right. You're going to prioritize, you're going to apply funding allocations to them, and then generate and derive the projects that relate to each one of the programs. So just based on how this is broken down, there's a stronger correlation between projects and the strategy using programs as a natural bridge. The capability-driven investment approach is definitely the most mature of the three models. It introduces the concept of a business capability portfolio. Capabilities being the kind of core operating functions of our business in terms of what our business runs upon. Capabilities being composed or comprised of technology, people, and processes. By doing a mapping between our strategy and our capabilities, we're able to then start to generate demand. For example, if I have a strategy that has no supporting capability, no ability within my organization to execute on that strategy, I may generate a program to onboard a new capability into the portfolio. If I have strategies that are dependent on poor performing capabilities, I'm going to make investments in those capabilities to improve the performance, again, through transformation vehicles, through project or program demand. So in this model, the projects and programs are generated directly from that inference between strategy and capabilities. The other reason we see organizations adopting this model, and this is more of an IT example here, is the ability now to decompose capabilities down into technology, products, whatever's supporting them. So I can basically start to map operational assets and activities such as applications against capabilities and get a direct line of sight through to strategy. So from an IT perspective, I can actually spend time engaging the business in fundamental changes needed to the business capability and then have the traceability back down through, let's say, the IT landscape to align technology roadmaps with a strategy roadmap. So you start to develop a more embracing framework to align all execution with strategy, both operational as well as discretionary or strategic, the projects and programs themselves. Now, today we're going to delve deeper into the project-driven investment approach. Before we do so, a couple of polls. Which top-down planning technique are you utilizing today within your organization? And so we'll switch over to the polls. And of no surprise, the three approaches are listed here. There is an option for none, which could mean we're still kind of on that first come, first served basis. Maybe you're an IT organization where the prioritization and selection of investments are done outside of your process and you're acting more as a kind of partner, but yet an order taker to the business from a project execution perspective. So project-driven, program-driven, capability-driven, or none of the above. Another 5 seconds and then we'll close the poll. Okay, let's close the poll and look at the results. So as I said, the most common approach with 52% is project-driven, which we're going to take a look at today, which is great. Often we see organizations operating in kind of hybrid, so that next doesn't surprise me that the next important is, or next most utilized is the program-driven approach with 30%. With a few of us moving to and adopting the capability-driven approach, which is great because again it's the most mature of the three, and I'll pause to sort of analyze that further until we run the next poll, and then a bunch of us that are operating with none of these, and hopefully what we'll look at today will encourage the adoption of one of these techniques. So we can close that poll down. So we have another poll now that focuses on, okay, which planning technique do you see yourself moving to over time? So again, the same options here. Obviously, I don't think we're going to stay in the chaos arena, but are you looking to evolve your planning techniques? So again, move from project-driven to program-driven, program-driven to capability-driven, project-driven to capability-driven. There's no reason to have to go sequentially through all three. So another 5 seconds and we'll shut that poll. Okay. So the results of that poll, glad to see that I think we went from 13% of respondents previously that had no planning or won't utilize any planning technique to 5. So I'm going to assume that maybe the balance ended up now in the project-driven investment approach, seeing a good push from 30% to 42% in the program-driven investment approach, and now 37% saying that the capability investment approach is on the timeline to be mature too. And again, depending on where this is originating from, often see on the business side a natural tendency to move to the program-driven investment approach, strategy decomposition into programs, into projects. A lot of the IT shops that we're working with today are driving to that capability-driven model as described earlier. So that's good. Let's move on. So in terms of the project-driven investment approach we're going to focus on today, it's pretty simple. It's broken down into the full life cycle of the project: strategize, allocate, plan, manage, evaluate. where we start off by supporting that annual planning process of defining, prioritizing strategy, capturing business cases, running analysis to select the right portfolio, then moving into detailed planning, execution, and potentially evaluation, things like benefits realization, lessons learned on the back end. What's interesting here is we see organizations today operating a kind of hybrid of planning techniques, going through that annual planning or multi-year planning exercise, utilizing some of the techniques I'm going to show you today, but then acknowledging the fact that variables change, and then throughout that execution year, moving to more of a continuous planning model to optimize spend and maximize value across the portfolio throughout the year. We're going to focus on the upfront, sort of strategize and allocate today. So let's look at the key steps that manifest within this project-driven portfolio selection process. First, we start out with the important step of defining business strategy. Now, I'm not going to talk too much to this in this slide, simply because I'm going to do this in context of the demo. So a good way of defining a set of actionable, measurable, and unique business drivers. One of the most overlooked steps in PPM is then taking objective steps and utilizing objective techniques to prioritize that strategy within the stakeholders. And of course then through the usual process to lock and set sort of budgets, however you're going to break that down, by portfolio, by department, however budgets are being recorded within the organization. Now we enter into the usual sort of demand management process. Let's capture the project demand as it manifests across the business. Utilize techniques to do an analysis of how those projects contribute to the business drivers that have been defined and prioritized to derive prioritization schema. We'll talk more about a prioritization schema in a second. So prioritize project requests. Then look under those budget constraints, be it cost, human, or both, to optimize, sequence, and recommend the optimal portfolio for that planning year. So optimizing the cost constraints, run capacity planning analysis, which results in a committed portfolio that's moved then through into detailed planning and execution, and that's where dynamic planning sort of kicks in, as I showed from the previous slide. Now, last slide before we jump into the demonstration. What we're seeing a lot is the need in terms of the management from a business perspective of your project portfolio for a new metric. One that's actually been in the Microsoft PPM system for a while, but always played a supporting role, not necessarily got the attention it deserves. And it's a metric of strategic yield. It's derived based on deriving a strategic value score for a project, and we'll look at how that's done in the demonstration, divided by its cost to give the yield. It acts in multiple ways. It can act as a kind of bang for the buck indicator for each project in the annual planning process. It also provides an objective metric for analyzing not just pending or planned projects, but also in-flight projects. Again, if the cost of a project increases and the value stays the same, the yield will naturally fall, value divided by cost, acting as a kind of investment viability indicator that can be managed at the project level, program level, or portfolio level. So I can look at planned yield versus actual yield or forecasted yield at any level within my portfolio structure. So we'll look out for this metric, but it's key not just in the annual planning process, but also in the systematic replanning or dynamic planning of the portfolio. So let's jump in to the demonstration. So share the tool. So we're jumping into the Microsoft PPM Solution, and we're going to look at pretty much following that process that I just stepped through. Let's look at defining, prioritizing business strategy, capturing demand, then running optimization analysis and capacity planning analysis to recommend the right portfolio. So as you can see here, in the strategy module of the tool, you have driver library, driver prioritization, and portfolio analysis. Well, we'll be spending the majority of the time. This is out of the box for Microsoft Project Server, Microsoft Project Online. So as discussed, one of the first important things to do is engage the executive team to define a set of actionable, measurable, and unique business drivers. And of course, there's consultative techniques to ensure that you define a good set of business drivers that are actionable, from the sort of overall objectives of your organization. So the tool provides a way for you to simply house that strategy within the tool. So this is the name of one of the business drivers, expanding your marketing segments. We give it a description. It can be at the enterprise level or by department, which is important. And if you consider a business driver measurable, of course you should be able to apply a KPI to it. Once you have a KPI, in this case we're using revenue growth as a KPI to measure this strategy, you can come up with impact statements. Impact statements that you see here are basically used to denote what contribution a project will have on one or more business drivers. So an extreme impact here would be valid if the project grows revenue by more than $3 million. And you can see the others here, all the way down to no impact whatsoever. So engaging the executives to define a set of actionable, measurable, and unique business drivers is certainly key, and housing that information within the Microsoft PPM platform. Now, I did say one of the most overlooked steps was then going to the next level and objectively prioritizing the business strategy. Now, the Microsoft PPM solution includes what's called a pairwise assessment, part of the analytical hierarchy process methodology, that is used to prioritizing pairs of things. What I'm going to do is just step back in the wizard here. I actually opened up the prioritization score for the CIO. In terms of sort of best practices in doing this, often you're going to engage each executive or stakeholder independently to understand his or her priorities for the strategy that's been defined for the upcoming planning period. Having got that information, you're then going to understand the divergence of opinion between the groups and bring between the individuals and bring them all into a sort of consensus building driver prioritization workshop where you look to iron out those divergences to drive consensus around the priorities for the upcoming year. But either way, you're going to be utilizing this paired assessment. As the name suggests, Pairwise Comparison, it allows you to compare pairs of things. In this case, we're taking each business driver that's been defined and looking at its importance to the other for the upcoming planning period. So the question I'm asking here is expanded new marketing segments. Is it more or less important than improved customer satisfaction or improved employee satisfaction? And you have a scale here from extremely more important all the way down to extremely less important. So in this case, expanded new marketing segments is more important than improved customer satisfaction, is much more important than improved employee satisfaction, and so on. Now, you simply then navigate through this. So we're going to pivot to the next driver, improve customer satisfaction, and compare its importance to the other business drivers. Now, I won't bore you with the clicking through each of those. I'm just going to jump forward or fast forward to review priorities. So assume that that was completed in a facilitated session with the CIO, and this represents the CIO's priority scores. Increase market share in existing markets, highest rate driver with 33% of the weighting, and improve employee satisfaction, the lowest weighted driver for the upcoming planning period with 3% of the weighting. Now, often organizations will define strategy, but then manually rank them. 1 to 7 in this instance. This relative score is important for two reasons. One, I can instantly tell now that my top business driver with 33% of the weighting is 10 to 11 times more important when compared to my bottom business driver, improve employee satisfaction, with around 3% of the weighting. Also, what the project-driven planning technique gives you is a good framework for aligning investment with strategic priorities. So we need a way of proportionally understanding how well our investment is aligned with our strategy. And this relative score is important for that reason too. If I had $100 to invest in my business strategy, and I wanted to ensure perfect alignment, I would then stick $33 on the top business driver and $3 on the bottom business driver. Now, of course, we're not expecting perfect alignment, but that relative scale gives you that framework, that baseline, that benchmark needed to look at proportional spend based on strategic priorities, which is key. Also, things like consistency ratio and other aspects looks at how consistent you were in terms of completing that assessment. So a very important step. We're engaging the executives to understand the business strategy and, more importantly, prioritize that strategy in an objective manner for the upcoming planning period. So we looked at driver library or driver definition and driver prioritization. Next, take a look at entering a project into the system. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time here. Obviously, the Microsoft PPM solution provides strong demand management. I can come in here, initiate different types of work based on different templates I have. So maybe I'm going to initiate a new project development request. It's going to be governed by this workflow. Can simply submit this form here, and that request will start to be subjected to the governance controls that you define within the system. What I'm actually going to do is open up a request that's in the define stage here, which is the high-level business case, before we move into portfolio selection, which is the select gate. So I'm going to open up this project here. We can see it's in the define stage, Innovation Management Framework, and look what a good business case could look like. What we want to achieve here within the context of the Microsoft PPM platform is consolidate all information pertaining to that request that helps us make business decisions. So I don't want information necessarily residing in a Word document, an Excel document held in the project site. I want to have it in the system so I can govern the completion of that information and instantly report on it at any time. So I'm not going to spend too much time here, but the ability to obviously break down project metadata that's going to describe that project request is key. We want to move away from Excel and start to consolidate time phase, cost, benefit, or other financial assessments within the tool. So the ability here to come in and capture cost at whatever granularity, by quarter in this instance, or by year, depending on how you set it up. In this case, the tool is asking for it by quarter, or even drill down to expose the extent of the financial information that you want to capture. Full multi-currency capabilities, even being able to go beyond to break down by funding source is key. But we notice here, this grid is actually automatically aggregating resource assignment costs. In this case, these resource assignment costs are being managed at this stage in the project's life through the resource plan. So being able to capture resource requirements, in this case, the high-level roles that are needed to fulfill this potential project within the resource plan, or in turn have that captured within the schedule, that can feed the financial views here. So these are the types of skills we require, or roles we require, and this is potentially when they're needed. So we've got, so far, within this business case, a high-level project metadata, cost information, high-level resource requirements. When there's a cost, potentially there should be a benefit, so being able to break out financial benefits or non-financial benefits too is key, and capture that in a time-phased manner. And I'm not going to go through everything here, but let's focus on strategic impact, because this is an assessment now going to help us to understand the project's contribution against the business strategy. So here are the business drivers that we just defined and prioritized: expanded new marketing segments, improved customer satisfaction, and notice the impact statements being utilized. What's considered an extreme versus strong versus moderate versus low impact. Of course, a project can impact one or more business drivers, and here we're deriving an overall strategic value score, an absolute score that denotes the strategic value of the project that we can use to be prioritized. But we can also look to derive strategic yield, which is the bang for the buck, value divided by cost. So I can take the value here divided by the cost, and we'll look at that in a second. You know, I can come up with other scoring techniques that comprise other prioritization schema that I may want to utilize. Today we'll be using strategic value as the core prioritization schema, but you can utilize within the analysis any prioritization schema that you like. And of course, as I said, the benefit of having everything captured within the project business case within Project Server or Project Online versus in different documents is, one, we can govern the completion of that information. We can't move on until the right level of information has been captured. But two, it's instantly reportable at any level, right? So here's just a simple example of a report that's leveraging information from that business case to build a one-pager that can be used in different meetings, etc. But obviously, it can include other information as needed too. So metrics, as we see here, financial metrics. Here's that strategic yield number, value divided by the cost estimate, who's funding the project, payback periods, and other things that you would expect to see. So we looked at definition of strategy, prioritization of strategy. Next, let's take a look at how we can optimize the portfolio. So I'm going to go to the portfolio analysis capability now within the Microsoft PPM platform. and I'm going to start with the baseline scenario. So I've already set this up. I have a wish list of projects that have hit that select gate, that portfolio selection gate. And we're using strategic value, the impact into the business strategy, as the core prioritization schema. If you look on the left-hand side here, you'll see the concept of efficient frontier, which is being derived here based on strategic value on the Y and budget cost on the X. And what the baseline scenario actually represents here is a world of no scarcity. It's simply saying to deliver all these projects in my wish list, in other words, to get 100% of the perceived value from this portfolio, it's going to cost $13 million. So the efficient frontier basically represents the optimal value point from different cost thresholds. So for $13 million, the best I can get is 100%, right? That's what it's saying. So we're in the land of what-if analysis now. So I can come in and say, well, look, you know, I have a scarcity issue. I only have $10 million. And there's a linear optimization algorithm that's going to recommend, and recommends the key word here, the optimal portfolio under different cost constraints. In this case, what we're saying is for $10 million, and to maximize the value score, in this case we're getting 91% of the available value from the portfolio, these projects should get moved out and these projects are included, so we can see which projects are moved out. And so I can save that as a 10 mil scenario. Because it's what-if analysis, I can come in now and change the constraint to $8 million and recalculate. Tool again, linear optimization algorithm, which is considering inter-project dependencies as well, is going to recommend the optimal solution to maximize the value criteria, in this case strategic value, and we can see we're getting 83% of the available value. This is the point at 8 million we hit the efficient frontier. So I can save that as an 8 mil scenario. We can also see the projects that were moved out. So obviously I can play around to my heart's content, but the next thing is maybe I won't change the cost constraint. Maybe I'm just going to override the algorithm and say, you know what, that innovation management framework project we just looked at, that's a pet project of mine and that's coming in, or it could be a compliance project, however you want to break down the criteria for forcing in or forcing something out of the analysis. So I can force this in. I haven't changed the $8 million. I'm just saying you must do the innovation management project and calculate that decision or recalculate that decision. So tool is going to instantaneously tell us the trade-off. We went from 83% to 79% of value. If you look at the efficient frontier, we've actually dropped beneath the efficient frontier. I can never go above. I can never go above the optimal point, but I can fall beneath the efficient frontier, meaning there are constraints prohibiting me from reaching the efficient frontier. In this case, we forced in a project. This project was also had a dependency on data passing tool that was brought in because of that decision, and we can quickly understand the trade-offs by seeing which projects were moved out. So I can save this one as an 8 mil, force in. So again, a good way of being able to just run scenarios, save scenarios, and communicate scenarios. We can also move from the efficient frontier view, again, going back to those business driver priorities and using that impact assessment in terms of the project's contribution to each one of those business drivers to understand investment alignment proportionally to the business driver priorities. So in this case, you know, we can see one of our highest priority drivers, increased market share in existing markets, highest priority driver, but we have a relatively low proportional investment. Whereas standardized cross-functional processes and you know, a lower priority, we could be over-investing. And there may be good reasons for that. In fact, look, improve employee satisfaction, although it was the lowest ranked business driver, you know, we are investing heavily in that area, which there may be very good reasons for that. So, you know, it gets you to ask questions. That may be fine. You're not forcing you into a perfect alignment. And year one, it could be that you have a misaligned portfolio for various reasons. And over the years, you're going to work to generate different planning techniques that actually generate demand that is better aligned with the strategy as discussed earlier. So, you know, of course, you know, you can go from grid views to scatter views and see the value cost breakdown as you would expect. Of course, there's many different bubble charting views now available for reporting in the Microsoft PPM platform too. So I can commit the scenario at this stage and update the workflow, Or I can switch gears. I can say, look, we looked at it through a cost lens. Let's take a look at it now through a resource lens. So we're moving through that last scenario, which was the 8 mil force in. And I'm going to hide that. In fact, I'm going to show you one more thing because I think I skipped one area. In fact, I did. So the comparing scenario. So obviously now I can share those results and compare side by side in terms of what we run and the metrics from each. So let's go back to the analyze resources. So we're switching gears to look at it from a resource lens, and we see the $8 million force in scenario now broken down here. What this analysis is doing is capacity planning. It's saying, okay, this is the projects we're moving forward in from a value cost perspective. So which ones can we fully staff and which ones do have resource shortfalls based on the available resources and the proposed scheduling of these projects. So selected doesn't necessarily mean selected, it just means they can be fully resourced at this time. Not selected doesn't mean you're not going to do it, it means there's a resource shortfall at this time. What you tend to find certainly in annual planning scenarios is the projects naturally get front-loaded in that planning horizon, leading to a natural deficit of resources, let's say for the first 6 months, and an availability of resources or a surplus of resources in the latter period of the year. So there is economies of scale or efficiencies to sort of play around with the scheduling of the portfolio within that given planning period to better utilize the available resources before throwing money at the problem to hire in more. So it is a capacity assessment. So we can sort of now go down and compare here our availability. Now this is a role level assessment. This is a proactive capacity planning system which is done at the role level, analyst, project manager, consultant, whatever it may be. So this represents the availability of the different roles in the organization, and obviously the project requirements here represent the demand from the projects that have been included within this analysis. No need to look at the selected necessarily because they can be fully resourced. But what we can see without even mining too much deeper here, and there's different views where we can see this too, is within these periods here we have an over-allocation and we have free resources towards the end of the year. So I can come down here and see the types of resources these projects need, and I could probably start to push these projects out further in the year. Obviously I would go down and sort of look at the different skills within this view. But as we're short on time, what I'll do is just go back to the Gantt view. And it provides an interface now to do something that is critical. The ability now to come in and say, okay, well, what happens if this project didn't start in April? We push it out to later in the year. Do we have available resources now to fully resource? Now, we can assume that we don't need to fully resource. Maybe we're going to run a 5% over allocation, whatever we're going to do here. But the tool can take that into consideration. I recalculated that, and that project can now be fully staffed and has moved in. So we can play around with the scheduling based on obvious, scheduling constraints, from a project dependency point of view, and then we can start to introduce other analysis like running headcount scenarios and other things that I won't do now. So what we just looked at there was out of the box portfolio optimization, capacity planning techniques, which obviously are provided by the Microsoft PPM Platform, Project Online, Project Server, and I think you will agree, completely dispels the myth that the Microsoft PPM Platform doesn't have world-class top-down portfolio management capabilities, and we just looked at one subset of those capabilities. What's important here is any of those analyses were also recorded and saved, and so can be shared and edited and evolved. So I think that ends the demonstration portion. Let's move back to the slides themselves. So I'm not going to get too deep into this sort of case study example, but Transalta was a company that leveraged both the Microsoft PPM and actually UMT360's enterprise portfolio management system to do many things. One of the reasons was to better automate the annual planning process. This was a kind of CFO-driven initiative, and some of the benefits here, having rolled the solution out, as it provided a single source of information, of up-to-date information pertaining to the project, of all facets, resource, cost, benefit, in one place that can be relied upon. One of the sort of notable things for me, it goes back to that inefficiency problem that we talked about earlier, was they actually found when they compared the previous year's budget process when they didn't have the Microsoft PPM solution to the year they ran it with the Microsoft PPM solution, there was 75% time saving in the annual capital budgeting process. So in the submission of the requests, in the analysis of the requests, in moving through into an approved, committed portfolio, which is significant because a lot of rework and inefficiency occurs in terms of moving everything into PowerPoint, taking PowerPoint, editing PowerPoint, going back, updating the tool. Everything is done in one place and cascades through, which is important. And of course, it goes without saying that they found their process to be more objective and a better way of identifying a portfolio with a higher value and seeing things that's just difficult to see, inter-project dependency and other things that don't jump out at you when using Excel or other tools. So, another poll, and last poll for the day. How many of you are utilizing these capabilities today in either Project Online or Project Server? So the answers are, yep, we are. No, we're not. No, but we plan to. And no, because we're using another PPM tool. Or no PPM tool. All right, another 5 seconds and we'll close this down. All right, so yes, 11%, great. Hopefully, we didn't get too deep into some of the theory here, but hopefully, utilizing the full capabilities. And a lot of this is kind of the facilitation approach and the success of defining a good set of business drivers and facilitating those driver prioritization sessions to drive consensus around the strategy for the upcoming planning period. No, 49%. So that's no, we are using the Microsoft PPM platform, but not necessarily utilizing these capabilities. That's very common too, and often, what we find with many organizations that maybe we're using older versions of Microsoft PPM, upgraded from 2007 to 2010, now 2013, and soon to be 2016. But yet, carried on utilizing the tool in exactly the same way, and didn't even realize that some of these capabilities around demand, portfolio selection, capacity planning, were now native out-of-the-box features or modules. 24% great, no, but we plan to. So that's a significant portion that are using Microsoft but not using these capabilities, but 24%, that's great that you are. And 16% using different PPM tools. So maybe you're evaluating the Microsoft PPM platform, and hopefully you've seen at least how the solution addresses parts of demand management, but more importantly, portfolio selection. And we'll be doing many other sessions over this year, looking at the other out-of-the-box capabilities that are very powerful across what we consider the foundational capabilities of PPM: governance, demand management, resource management, forms of schedule management, agile versus waterfall, time reporting, status reporting, BI reporting, team collaboration, the 101 stuff, the core capability areas of traditional PPM. Okay. So a couple of slides to wrap this up. We looked at the project-driven investment approach, and what are the pros and cons of this approach? Now, generally, I'm a big fan of this approach. What I would say the advantages of this approach is really upfront engagement of the executive team to define and prioritize strategy, and using that as a kind of North Star or a guiding light in terms of portfolio selection or decisions that will happen downstream. Strategic value to me and yield are two metrics that are underutilized. Strategic value, one of its core strengths, based on how you define your business drivers, which normally are going to reflect, revenue growth, cost reduction, efficiency, risk, and other sort of softer metrics, as we saw, employee stat, customer stat, and various things. It provides a good score to measuring both hard and soft benefits for a project. Therefore, it's actually a good score to evaluate different types of projects. Or certainly evaluate projects that may have, strong financial metrics like an NPV versus projects that may naturally have a poor NPV based on the type of project there are. So it's a unifier based on hard and soft metrics, giving you the ability to have a better apples-to-apples comparison. Strategic yield, we just touched on it today in context to the annual planning. So when that optimization logic was recommending portfolios, it was actually doing that based on doing a value over cost, a yield maximization within the solution. Now, strategic yield, again, to me, when we work with PMOs, is becoming one of the key metrics to manage your portfolio from a business perspective. We kind of joke and say from a CFO, COO perspective. And it is definitely very valuable within annual planning, but what's frustrated me for years is that when the portfolio then moves into execution, many organizations then adopt and fall back to other prioritization metrics to evaluate in-flight success, like financial metrics. But yield is equally important, as we discussed earlier, in the assessment and management of in-flight portfolios too, because if cost changes and value stays the same, yield will fall and act as a natural investment viability indicator. It's a strong technique as well for annual planning for sure, and the assessment of discretionary investment. So what's kind of the primary disadvantages or cons of this approach is one of the potentially it's not the best approach for generating demand that aligns with strategy, right? Because often, as we said, business cases are generated disconnected, but yes, mapped against the strategy rather than being the project request deriving from the strategy. Often in that driver definition process as well, you may need to drill down a little deeper than just a set of business drivers, decompose into departmental business drivers, even sort of cascade down business strategies to make sure that they're truly actionable and measurable across the business. And I think I'll pause there. The other kind of weakness is, it maybe doesn't provide a great framework for evaluating all execution, operational as well as discretionary or projects. So that's another issue there. Now, as we saw on one of the slides here, we just looked at project-driven investment approach today. Obviously, there's different techniques. Doing nothing, the onboarding different elements of project-driven prioritization, then moving to kind of optimization and portfolio analysis. But as we look to mature, which many of you in that poll said you will be doing, into other techniques that do a better job of actually deriving the demand from the strategy, program-driven or capability-driven, and capability-driven also providing that framework that allows to align all execution with strategy, operational as well as discretionary. So that ends the session today. We are going to pause now for a Q&A. If you want any more information on portfolio selection or how to optimize your investment in the Microsoft PPM platform, Project Online, Project Server, don't hesitate to contact the UMT360 team. As I mentioned, we don't just optimize your existing investment, we also extend that through proprietary, recognized enterprise portfolio management solution that we built that seamlessly integrates with the Microsoft PPM platform, and that's going to help you mature into these program-driven, capability-driven approaches, as well as do many other things on top of the strong foundation of the Microsoft PPM platform. So with that, we'll pause for the Q&A. If you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the Q&A manager.